They laughed when I wiped marinara sauce off my wife's face in the middle of a packed restaurant. What they didn't know was that the second I pulled out my phone and made one quiet call, their entire world started coming apart at the seams. Ask anyone in Mandarin Lakes who knows me. Steve Reynolds. My wife Susan says I have two emotional settings, calm and asleep. She says it like it's a complaint. But I've seen her smile when she thinks I'm not looking. We've been married 38 years. I did the math once. That's more than 13,000 mornings of waking up next to the same woman and thinking, yeah, I'd pick her again. Susan Reynolds is the kind of woman who sends handwritten thank you notes, who remembers your coffee order and your mother's maiden name. She is, without any exaggeration, the finest human being I have ever known. So understand what I'm telling you when I say what happened at Marchetti's on a Friday night in November nearly broke something in me that I don't think time alone could have fixed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Cole first. Cole Reynolds is our son, 34 years old, 6 feet tall. We raised that boy right. Friday night dinners, church on Sunday, summer jobs at 16, college paid in full because Susan and I agreed our kid wasn't starting his adult life in a hole. He was a good man. Gentle, actually. The kind of guy who'd help a stranger change a tire in the rain and never mention it afterward. Then he met Ashley. Ashley Brent, now Ashley Reynolds, came into Cole's life about 4 years ago. I remember the first time he brought her to the house on Longleaf Pine Drive. Pretty girl. Sharp dresser. Firm handshake. She looked me dead in the eye when she introduced herself, and I thought, all right, this one's got confidence. I respected that. I stopped respecting it about 6 months later when I realized confidence and cruelty can wear the exact same outfit. It started small, the way she'd cut Susan off mid-sentence at dinner, the sighing whenever Susan talked about her garden or her book club, anything that wasn't about Ashley, the eye roll she thought nobody saw when Susan laughed too loud at something on TV. Then it got less small. The Christmas she loudly told Cole, right in front of Susan, that his mother was exhausting to be around. And Cole, my son, my boy who used to cry at the end of Toy Story 3, he just let it happen, every single time. He'd look at the floor, or change the subject, or worse, he'd agree with her like a man who'd traded in his spine for a quiet house. Susan never complained to me, not directly. I'd catch her sometimes after a phone call with Cole or her sister Rose, standing at the kitchen sink staring out the window at nothing. I'd ask if she was okay. She'd say, I'm fine, Steve. And I'd believe her, because it was easier. Welcome back to Dad's Raw Revenge. Before we continue, we just hit 30,000 subscribers and I could not have done that without your engagement. Every comment, every like, every share. That's you. That's this community. Thank you. Now, the dinner. Cole called me on a Tuesday in early November, said he wanted to do a family dinner. Reconnect. His word. I told Susan and she got this look on her face. Hopeful and cautious at the same time. Like someone offering you an umbrella when you've already been standing in the rain for an hour. Maybe Ashley's turned a corner, she said. I said, maybe. But I love my wife, so I put on my good jacket. Marchetti's is on San Marco Boulevard, right in the heart of San Marco. The kind of neighborhood where the trees are old, and the restaurants have real tablecloths, and the wine list has its own separate menu. Susan loves it there. We'd had our 30th anniversary dinner at Marchetti's. I should have seen it as a good sign that Cole picked the place. Instead, I see it now for what it was. Ashley choosing a public location. An audience. A stage. We got there at 7. Cole and Ashley were already seated. Bottle of Barolo on the table, already open. I noticed Ashley didn't stand up when we walked in. Just watched us make our way through the restaurant like we were being evaluated. Cole hugged Susan. He hugged me. He seemed nervous. Kept touching his water glass without drinking from it. Ashley smiled at us. That particular smile she had that never quite made it to her eyes. You look tired, Susan, was the first thing she said. 6 words in. Susan laughed it off. Long week, she said. I poured the wine and told myself to relax. For about 40 minutes it was almost normal. We talked about the St. Johns River cleanup project Susan had been volunteering for. About the Jaguars being reliably the Jaguars. About a trip Susan and I had been loosely planning to Savannah in the spring. Cole was telling a story about a big job they'd just booked. A New Year's Eve gala at the Hyatt Regency downtown. And he was animated, excited, the most like himself I'd seen him in months. For a minute I let myself think, okay, maybe tonight's all right. Maybe I was wrong about this. I was not wrong. Ashley had been quiet for a stretch, which I noticed because Ashley was never quiet without a reason. She was doing something in her lap. I thought it was her phone. I thought she was bored. I was right that it was her phone. She pulled it out, tapped the screen twice, and slid it across the white tablecloth towards Susan, smooth and deliberate, like a card player laying down a hand. I looked at Cole. Cole looked at the candle. That's when I knew. He knew what was on that phone. He'd known all evening. That nervous energy, the water glass he kept touching. He'd known exactly what tonight was, and he'd let us walk in anyway. I think we should clear the air, Ashley said, about some things that have been said. Susan's sister, Rose Burke, who lives up in Pontevedra, the kind of woman who says exactly what she means, and has never once apologized for it. The message was short, direct, exactly the kind of thing Rose would write without losing a minute of sleep over it. Don't treat my sister that way again. That was it. 7 words, sent to Ashley months earlier after Ashley had said something cutting to Susan at a family gathering. Susan had smiled through it the way she always did, driven home, and called Rose from the parking lot of a Publix on Hendricks Avenue because she needed to tell someone. Rose, being exactly the kind of sister she is, had picked up the phone and handled it directly. No drama, no lengthy explanation, just a clear, clean line drawn on behalf of her sister. Most people, when a woman like Rose Burke draws that kind of line, step back behind it and stay there. Ashley had spent the last several months deciding what to do with it instead. And what she decided was this: that nobody was going to correct her. Not Rose. Not anyone. And tonight, at Marchetti's, with candles on the table and a full restaurant around us, she was going to make that point in a way that nobody present would ever forget. That text message wasn't just a grievance. It was Ashley's answer to Rose. Her way of saying, to Susan, to Cole, to anyone watching, that there was no line she recognized and no person she feared. Your own sister had to text me, Ashley said, sliding the phone closer to Susan, because you've been talking about me behind my back, trying to poison my marriage. Susan looked at that screen, and something in her face went absolutely still. Not anger, just the quiet devastation of a woman who realizes her most private pain had been sitting in someone's back pocket for months, waiting to be used against her. Ashley, what I said to my sister was private. Nothing is private when you're undermining my marriage. I was hurting. I talked to my sister because I was hurt. Cole. Ashley looked at him. Not a request. A signal. And Cole looked at his mother who had cried alone in a parking lot and never breathed a word of it to me, who had a sister who fought for her and still ended up sitting here. And he said, "She has a point, Mom. You've been causing a lot of stress." The table next to us had gone quiet. I noticed that. I noticed the couple 2 tables over who had stopped their own conversation. I noticed the waiter who had been approaching with a water pitcher stop about 10 feet away, read the room, and retreat toward the kitchen. Susan looked at Cole, just looked at him, the way a mother looks at her child when she's trying to find the boy she raised somewhere inside the man sitting across from her. "Cole," she said softly, "I didn't mean it that way." She didn't finish. Because Ashley stood up, she reached across the table and picked up the serving bowl, a deep ceramic dish full of leftover pasta fra diavolo, thick red sauce, the works. And I saw it happening and my brain registered it, but my body didn't move fast enough. Nobody would have. Because you don't expect it. You never expect it. Not in a restaurant on San Marco Boulevard with candles on the table and jazz coming through the speakers. Not in any version of the world you think you're living in. She poured it over my wife's head, slowly, deliberately. Not a splash, not an accident, not a moment of lost control. Slowly, the way you do something you've been planning. The restaurant went silent. The sauce ran down Susan's silver hair, down her face, down the sky blue blouse she had ironed that afternoon. Susan sat completely still, both hands flat on the table, eyes straight ahead, breathing. Ashley set the bowl down, smoothed her dress with both hands, sat back in her chair and said, clear and calm, as a woman reading the weather, "That's what you deserve for talking about me behind my back." The whole restaurant heard it. Every single table. And my son, looked at his mother sitting there soaked and trembling with pasta sauce running down her face, and said, "She's right, Mom. You brought this on yourself. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I need you to understand what I felt in that moment, and what I chose to do with it. I felt everything. I felt it all arrive at once, like a wave that had been building for 14 months finally making landfall. The anger was there. The grief was there. The urge to flip that table and say things that would follow all of us for the rest of our lives, that was there too. But I looked at Susan, at her hands still flat on the table, at the way she was holding herself together through pure dignity because she refused, even now, even like this, to make a scene, to give Ashley the explosion she'd clearly been engineering all evening. If she could hold herself together, so could I. I stood up from my chair. I took the white linen napkin from my lap. I walked around to Susan's side of the table and I wiped her face, gently, the way you touch the face of someone you would burn the world down for. Except I wasn't going to burn anything down. Not here. Not tonight. Not in a way that anyone in this restaurant would ever see. I helped her to her feet. I picked her handbag up from the floor. I buttoned her coat over that ruined blouse so she didn't have to walk through Marchetti's with marinara sauce on her chest. Then I looked at Cole, just once. No words. Just a look that said everything I would never say out loud, that something had ended tonight. He looked away first. We walked out together, through every silent table, past the hostess who looked like she wanted to evaporate, through the front door and out into the warm night. Behind me, I heard Ashley laugh. She genuinely thought she'd won. She had absolutely no idea what she'd just started. We got in the car. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. Dialed Douglas Hale. He picked up immediately. 58 years old, sharpest legal mind in Duval County, been my closest friend since we were at Florida State together in 1981. I said 3 words, and I told him exactly what I needed. He didn't ask what happened. He said, "All of it?" Susan didn't cry until we were on Hendricks Avenue, maybe a mile from Marchetti's, stopped at a red light, and she made this sound, quiet, involuntary, like something she'd been holding and finally slipped loose. And I reached over and took her hand and just held it. I didn't say anything wise. I didn't offer perspective. Sometimes the most honest thing a man can do is just hold his wife's hand at a red light and let her feel what she feels. When we got home to Longleaf Pine Drive, I helped her inside, got her a glass of water, and found the oversized Jaguar sweatshirt she loves that lives on the hook by the back door. She went to the bathroom to change out of that blouse, and I stood at the kitchen counter and I listened to the house. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the ordinary sounds of the life we'd built together, and I let the full weight of the evening settle over me. She came back out in the sweatshirt, her face washed clean, and she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. "What did you do, Steve, when you made that call?" I said, "Nothing that wasn't already in place." She looked at me for a long moment. 38 years. Susan can read my face the way most people read a book they've had memorized since 1986. She knows when I'm bluffing and when I'm not. She knew I wasn't. She was quiet. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Cole and Ashley had signed their loan documents on a Sunday afternoon, soup bowls still in the sink, the whole thing feeling in that moment like something from another lifetime. "Okay," she said finally, "tell me." And this is where I need to back up and explain something. Because you need to understand exactly what Douglas and I had built, and why it had been sitting there, quietly, for over 14 months. When Cole came to me about starting the business, I said yes without hesitation. He was my son. It was a legitimate plan, and I believed in him. But here's the thing about spending 40 years as a commercial real estate attorney. I don't do handshakes. I don't do "we're family, it'll be fine." I do documents. Douglas drew up a loan agreement for the full $275,000. And Cole and Ashley signed it right here at this kitchen table, one Sunday afternoon while Susan made them grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup like they were 12 years old. Cole didn't read it carefully. Ashley didn't either. They were excited, already mentally spending the money flipping through pages and initialing wherever Douglas had put the little sticky arrows. I thought about saying, "Hey, maybe slow down, maybe read paragraph 14, but I didn't. Because I genuinely, at that point in my life, never thought I'd need it. Paragraph 14 was a callable loan clause, meaning I could demand full repayment of the entire balance within 30 days, at any time for any reason, at my sole discretion. It was a precaution, a quiet little insurance policy tucked into page 6 of a document nobody read closely enough. I'd hoped it would collect dust forever. Friday night at Marchetti's, it stopped collecting dust. Susan sat with that for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I don't want to destroy him, Steve. He's still my son." "I know that," I said. "I'm not trying to destroy anybody. I'm just stepping out of the way and letting what's real become visible. Some things have been hidden for too long." She nodded slowly. She went to bed around 10. I stayed up until almost 2 in the morning, out on the back porch in the November cool, listening to the neighborhood settle into quiet. I thought about Cole, about the boy who used to sit in this exact spot next to me on fall Sunday afternoons, watching the Jaguars find increasingly creative ways to lose football games, falling asleep against my arm before halftime. That boy was still in there somewhere, underneath everything Ashley had layered over him. I had to believe that. I needed to believe that. But belief doesn't cancel accountability. That's something I learned a long time ago. By 6 a.m. I was downstairs with coffee. By 6:15 my phone rang. Susan's younger sister Rose was not a woman known for her patience or her indoor voice. "Steve, you tell me right now what you are going to do about this, because I have been up since 4 in the morning and I am this close to driving to Cole's apartment myself." Rose. My voice was quiet, even. She poured food on Susan's head in front of a restaurant full of people, and Cole just sat there like a rose, like a decorative plant. "I need you to trust me." A pause, hot and reluctant. "Okay. Make sure she's fine. I'll call her this afternoon," she said. I hung up, poured a second cup of coffee, looked out the kitchen window at Susan's garden in the early morning light. Then I picked up my phone and sent Douglas one text. Monday morning, Douglas filed the notice. Under the terms of the loan agreement, signed, notarized, and registered in Duval County, Cole and Ashley Reynolds were hereby formally notified that the outstanding principal balance of $275,000 was being called in full, payable within 30 days. I went to Home Depot on Atlantic Boulevard that morning, bought some weather stripping for the garage door, came home, had a sandwich, watched about 20 minutes of the news. Douglas called at 11 a.m. He said Ashley had called his office at 10:47. He said she was, and I'm using his exact words here, aggressively confident this wasn't going to hold up. Douglas Hale has been practicing law in Jacksonville for 31 years. He has a framed oil painting of his Florida bar certificate on his office wall, and a photograph of himself fishing with a federal judge on the St. Johns River on his desk. He is not a man who rattles easily. He told me he listened to Ashley speak for approximately 45 seconds, and then said, very calmly, "Mrs. Reynolds, I'd encourage you to retain counsel," and hung up. I picture that moment sometimes, and I won't pretend it doesn't bring me a small amount of peace. Ashley told Cole it was a bluff. She was certain of it. I know this because Cole called me Tuesday afternoon, and I could hear her in the background, coaching him, her voice low and urgent, just under the words Cole was saying, like a prompter in the wings of a theater. Cole said, "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your son." I said, "I know you are. That's why this hurts." "Cole." I kept my voice even, not cold. They laughed even. When I wiped marinara. There's a difference and it matters. I drew up contracts for a living for 40 years. Douglas drew up that agreement. I watched you sign it. It will hold up. I need you to understand that clearly so you can make good decisions going forward. Silence on the line, long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, "So what is it you actually want here, Dad? An apology? Is that what this whole thing is about?" I thought about that question for a moment before I answered, because it deserved a real answer, not a quick one. "I don't want anything from you right now, son. What I want is for you to feel the weight of what you allowed to happen to your mother. Not punishment from me. I'm not interested in punishing you. I want you to feel it from life. From consequence. You've been protected from consequences your whole life, and I thought that was love. I'm starting to think I was wrong about that." Then I said, "You'll understand the difference eventually." And I hung up. Wednesday morning, their business account was frozen, pending the collection process. At 7:14 a.m., I received a text from Cole that was written almost entirely in capital letters. I read it twice, put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and went outside to mow the lawn. The grass didn't need it, but I needed the noise. Now, and stay with me here, because this is where the story takes a turn I didn't engineer and didn't expect. This is the part where Ashley's own decisions start doing my work for me. For about 6 months prior to that dinner at Marchetti's, Ashley had been quietly planning to refinance the house on Cypress Ridge Court, the house that I had helped them buy. The down payment, $95,000, that she had always assumed was a gift from a generous father-in-law who loved his son. It was not a gift. When I handed over that money 3 years ago, Douglas had advised me, as he always did, to document it properly. Not because I suspected trouble, not because I was planning anything, simply because I am a man who documents things. It was registered as a deferred interest family loan, notarized, filed with Duval County, a quiet little piece of paper in a filing cabinet that nobody thought about. Ashley had been sitting on what she believed was $200,000 of accessible equity. Her plan, and Douglas obtained this through entirely legal channels when the mortgage lender contacted him after discovering the prior registered lien, was to pull that equity out, fund a new venture she'd been developing, and position herself for a future that, from what Douglas could piece together, didn't necessarily center around Cole. The lender discovered the lien, called Douglas. The refinancing application was denied. I want you to let that land for a second. Ashley had spent months planning a financial exit from her own marriage using money from a house I'd helped buy, with a loan she didn't know existed. And the whole thing collapsed because of a document filed quietly in Duval County 3 years ago by a man she'd dismissed as out of touch. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon. I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 10 minutes, and I thought about what that meant. Not with satisfaction, but with a sadness I hadn't expected, because it confirmed something I'd been trying not to know. That the marriage Cole had been defending and Susan had been grieving over, and I had been losing sleep about, was already, in Ashley's mind, a transaction she was preparing to exit. Cole just didn't know it yet. He found out soon enough. If you've been listening for a while, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing where this community reaches. Hit that like button while you're at it, and be sure you are subscribed to the New Year's Eve Gala at the Hyatt Regency. The one Cole had been so proud of at dinner, the capstone event that was supposed to carry the business through the first quarter, fell apart the same week the account froze. They couldn't process the vendor deposits. The clients understandably hired someone else. The contracts they'd signed, the vendors they'd committed to, the revenue they'd been counting on, all of it dissolved inside of 72 hours. Cole called me that Thursday. The capital letters energy from his Tuesday text was completely gone. He sounded like a man standing in a house that had been quietly emptied while he was looking the other direction. Dad, the gala fell through. I heard. We can't. The vendors we already committed to. I don't know how to. Cole, I said, and I kept my voice level because this wasn't a moment for anger, and it wasn't a moment for I told you so. What did you think was going to happen? Long pause. I thought you'd calm down, he said, quietly, without the defensiveness from before. Just honest. I am calm, I said. Son, this is exactly what calm looks like. When someone pours food on your mother's head in a public restaurant, and you sit there and tell her she deserved it, this is what calm looks like afterward. I heard him exhale, a long, slow breath. Then, can I talk to Mom? Your mom is at brunch with her sister. Susan came home with her hair freshly blown out and a pair of earrings Rose had talked her into at a boutique on the way back, and she stood in the kitchen doorway looking more like herself than she had in days. I'm not going to tell you Susan was fine. She wasn't fine. I'd wake up some nights and hear her on her side of the bed, just quiet in the dark, and I knew she wasn't sleeping about. Because you can absorb a lot of pain in this life. But hearing your own child say you deserve to be humiliated, that particular hurt doesn't just wash off with a good night's sleep and a fresh pair of earrings. It lives in you for a while. It asks questions about where you went wrong, and what you missed, and whether you could have prevented it. What Susan Reynolds does with that kind of pain, though, and this is the thing about her that I have never stopped being amazed by, is she doesn't let it own her. She gets dressed. She calls her sister. She goes to brunch. She comes home and stands in the kitchen doorway looking like herself. She doesn't hand Ashley the additional satisfaction of watching her collapse. I fell in love with my wife again that Thursday afternoon, and I didn't even tell her until 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, across town on Cypress Ridge Court, things were deteriorating faster than even I had anticipated. Ashley retained an attorney, a man named Bob Traylor, out of a small firm in Riverside. Douglas, when I told him, paused for exactly 1 second and said, Bob Traylor. Okay. Which in Douglas Hale language means, this will not be complicated. Bob sent a 4-page letter arguing that the callable clause was predatory in nature, and that the family loan on the down payment had been improperly disclosed. Douglas responded in 2 pages. Methodical, precise, devastating in the way that only very calm legal writing can be devastating. I won't take you through the specifics. The short version is, airtight, every word of it. A week passed, then another, I noticed in that second week that Cole had stopped calling. Not the angry calls, not the capital letters texts. All of it went quiet, which was, in its own way, more unsettling than the noise had been. Quiet from Cole usually meant something was happening that he didn't know how to say out loud. I was right about that. On a Friday evening, few weeks after the dinner at Marchetti's, my phone rang. Cole. I answered, and I could hear immediately that he was outside. Traffic, wind, the particular hollow echo of someone standing in a large open space. "Where are you?" I asked. "Gas station," he said. "Beach Boulevard." He'd left the house with a duffel bag, he told me. Ashley had handed him a separation agreement that afternoon. Formal, prepared, already notarized. Bob Traylor, it turned out, had been retained by Ashley alone, not by both of them together the way Cole had assumed. Bob had been working on two parallel tracks this entire time, fighting the loan on one hand, and on the other, preparing Ashley's exit from the marriage. Cole had been so consumed with the frozen account, with the failed gala, with trying to fight me, that he hadn't seen the ground shifting underneath his own house. I sat in my truck in the driveway on Longleaf Pine Drive, and I listened to my son tell me that his wife had been planning to leave him. And I felt something move through me that I genuinely had not prepared for. Not satisfaction. Not the quiet vindication of a man who saw it coming. Just grief. Clean, honest grief for my son. For the years he'd spent diminishing himself to keep that woman comfortable. For the loyalty he'd shown to someone who'd been drawing up exit papers while he defended her. For all the versions of Cole Reynolds that might have existed if he'd made different choices 3 years ago at a different kitchen table. "Where are you going tonight?" I asked. A long pause. I could hear the traffic on Beach Boulevard behind him. "I don't know," he said. I said Beach Boulevard to I-95, south to Hendricks, left on Longleaf Pine. You know the way. The longest pause yet. "Dad," his voice broke slightly on the word. Just slightly, after everything I said. "Cole," I said, "come home." He pulled into the driveway at 9 o'clock with a single duffel bag, and 3 days of stubble and the particular look of a man who has been wrong about everything important, and has finally completely run out of ways to avoid knowing it. I opened the front door before he could knock. Old habit. I always hear the truck in the driveway. He stood on the porch of the house he grew up in, under the same light fixture I'd been meaning to replace for 6 years, and he looked at me and didn't say anything. There was nothing ready to say yet, and he seemed to know that. I stepped aside, and he walked in. I want to describe what happened next carefully, because I never want to forget it. Susan was in the kitchen. She'd heard the truck, I think, because when I came around the corner behind Cole, she was already standing still in the middle of the kitchen, dish towel in her hands, not moving, just waiting. Cole stopped in the kitchen doorway. The two of them looked at each other across that kitchen, across the table where he'd signed the loan papers, across the counter where she'd made him soup, across 34 years of mornings and holidays, and ordinary Tuesdays that make up what it means to be someone's child. And I watched something happen in my son's face that I can only describe as a man coming back to himself. Not all at once. It moved across his face slowly, like light changing. Recognition. Remorse. The particular devastation of seeing clearly after a long time of choosing not to. He didn't make a speech. He didn't have anything prepared. He took 3 steps across that kitchen, and he went down to his knees on the floor in front of his mother, and he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." And his voice broke completely on the second sorry. He knelt there with his head down, and he just said it, over and over. Not performing it, meaning it the way you mean something when it's the only true thing left. Susan stood over him for a moment. I watched her fight it. She's a proud woman, my wife. She doesn't surrender to a moment easily. And I watched her stop fighting it. She reached down and she pulled his head to her chest, the way she had when he was 7 years old, and had nightmares about the neighbor's dog. Like no time had passed. Like he was still the boy who'd fall asleep on the couch watching football, and she'd put a blanket over him without waking him up. They both cried. I walked to the back door, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled it shut behind me. I sat in my chair and I looked out at the yard, at the big live oak in the corner that I planted the year Cole was born. Taller than the house now, older than any argument we've ever had. And I let them have the room. After a while I heard the back door open. Susan leaned out and said quietly, "Steve, come in. He wants to talk." I made coffee, the same mugs we've had since 1989. The ones with the Jacksonville skyline that Susan bought at a yard sale and refused to throw away every time I suggested it. Cole talked for a long time. About Ashley. About how it had worked the slow way it works. Not all at once, but incrementally. One small compromise after another, each one seeming reasonable in the moment. Until one day you're a man sitting at a table in Marchetti's telling your mother she got what she deserved, and you don't even flinch. I don't know when I became that person, he said. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, you didn't become that person, Cole. You acted like that person for a period of time. There's a difference, but only if you're willing to do the work to close the gap. He looked up. What does the work look like? Boring, I said. It looks boring and it takes years and there's no finish line. It looks like Sunday phone calls to your mother, showing up for no reason. Fixing things around here you keep meaning to fix. It looks like being consistent when nobody's watching and nobody's keeping score. That's what the work looks like. He nodded slowly. He understood. I could see that he understood. Susan reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Now. What happened to Ashley? The divorce moved through the process relatively quickly, because the separation agreement she'd already prepared did most of the organizational work. What she hadn't fully calculated, and I think this is worth saying clearly, was that the financial picture she'd been counting on had changed fundamentally. The equity she'd planned to extract was tied to the lien. The business was dissolved. The penalties from the defaulted gala contracts added another layer. Bob Traylor negotiated the best arrangement he could, but there wasn't much left to negotiate with. The house on Cypress Ridge went to a short sale in February. After the liens were satisfied, there was very little remaining. Ashley moved to Atlanta in early spring. A fresh start somewhere new. I want to be honest about something here, because this story isn't about destroying Ashley, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. Ashley is a person who decided somewhere along the way that cruelty was power, and that my wife and my family were things to be managed. She'll carry whatever she carries from the choices she made. That's between her and the life she builds going forward. I don't spend time thinking about her anymore. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. What I got back was my son. Not immediately, and not all at once. The way you get something like that back is slowly, the way the light changes in Jacksonville in late February, almost without you noticing until one afternoon you look up and realize it's warm again. Cole got an apartment in Riverside, close enough to drive over in 20 minutes, far enough to be his own man again, and rebuild something that was genuinely his. He took a job at a project management firm downtown, and he was good at it, because Cole Reynolds, when he's not operating under someone else's agenda, is sharp and competent and fundamentally decent in the way that decent people always are once you clear away what's been covering it. He called Susan every Sunday, without exception, traveling for work, busy week, inconvenient time zone, every Sunday without fail. I know because Susan started looking forward to Sundays again, and that alone was worth everything. The second Saturday of October, he drove over to Longleaf Pine Drive, and we replaced the porch light fixture together. 4 hours for a 45-minute job because I bought the wrong fitting the first time, and we had to drive to Home Depot on Atlantic Boulevard. And the guy in the electrical aisle was spectacularly unhelpful in a way that felt almost intentional. Cole and I stood in that aisle and looked at each other and laughed. Not at anything specific, just at the whole absurd afternoon. And I thought, there he is. There's my boy, still in there under everything, exactly where I'd left him. Thanksgiving was the three of us. Susan's turkey, the sweet potato casserole. The ambitious one, made by a woman who has always known exactly how to cook, and never needed anyone's opinion on the matter. Cole brought a pie from a bakery in Riverside, and set it on the counter and said, I tried to make one myself, and it looked like a crime scene, so I outsourced it. Susan laughed the real laugh, the one that goes all the way to her eyes and fills up a room. And I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched my family, and felt something settle in my chest that had been loose and rattling around for a long time. Here's the thing I want to leave you with, because I've thought about it a great deal since that November night, and I think it matters. I spent 40 years drawing up contracts and anticipating worst-case scenarios, and protecting assets and making sure the paperwork was airtight. Paragraph 14 was the product of all of that. And it worked. I won't pretend otherwise. But the thing I should have done, the thing that would have mattered more than any callable loan clause, was walk out onto this back porch 14 months earlier and say clearly to my son that what was happening to his mother was not acceptable and that I was not going to watch it anymore. That the peace I was keeping wasn't peace at all. It was just silence with better manners. But I'll tell you what I know at 64 years old. standing on a back porch in Mandarin Lakes on a cool November night, looking at a live oak tree I planted when my son was born. Quiet men are only quiet until they're not. And when a quiet man finally decides to stop being quiet, he does it exactly once. Completely, permanently, without a single wasted word. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.